October 13th, 1944. The village of Herrlingen sits quiet in the Swabian Alps of southern Germany. Inside a modest house along a public road, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel shares what will be his last quiet evening with his wife, Lucie. Outside, Gestapo agents have already infiltrated the peaceful town. Nazi plainclothes officers watch from the shadows. The house is surrounded. Tomorrow, two generals will arrive from Berlin. Tomorrow, Rommel will be dead. But tonight, in these final hours, the man they call the Desert Fox sits with the woman he's written to every single day of the war, and he talks about the enemy commander he's spent 3 years fighting. He talks about Winston Churchill. The story you're about to hear reveals something history almost forgot. In Rommel's final letters and conversations, preserved by his son Manfred and his loyal aide Hermann Oldinger, we find an extraordinary detail. The German general who pushed the British Eighth Army to the edge of defeat, who earned Churchill's public tribute as a great general across the havoc of war, spent some of his last private moments reflecting on the British Prime Minister. Not with hatred, not with the contempt you'd expect from a man about to die at his own regime's hands, but with something far more complex, something that tells us volumes about both men, about honor between enemies, and about the unbridgeable gap between the war Rommel thought he was fighting and the regime he actually served. Let's go back to understand how these two men became linked in one of World War II's strangest mutual respect stories. And let's uncover what Rommel really said about Churchill when he knew his own time was running out. 1941, North Africa. Erwin Rommel arrives in Libya with explicit orders to hold the line, nothing more. Within weeks, he attacks. His 7th Panzer Division from the French campaign had been nicknamed the Ghost Division because it moved so fast even German high command lost track of it. Now in the desert, Rommel does it again. British forces, expecting a defensive German posture, find themselves facing a commander who doesn't play by their rulebook. Rommel leads from the front, sometimes in captured British vehicles. On one occasion, his command vehicle drives parallel to a British column just a few hundred yards away. The British don't realize the prize target they're missing because Rommel's riding in their own equipment. Back in London, Winston Churchill watches these defeats with mounting fury. The surrender of Tobruk in June 1942 is a particular blow. The fortress had withstood a siege in 1941. Now Rommel takes it in a single day. 25,000 British troops surrender. Rommel is promoted to Field Marshal at age 49, the youngest in the Wehrmacht. And Churchill faces a vote of no confidence in Parliament. With Rommel just 60 miles from Alexandria, with Egypt and the Suez Canal hanging in the balance, Churchill would later exclaim to his staff, "Rommel, Rommel, 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 what else matters but beating him?" But here's what's remarkable. Even as Churchill obsesses over stopping Rommel, even as British soldiers die in the desert, Churchill does something almost unthinkable in total war. On January 27, 1942, standing in the House of Commons, facing criticism over the defeats in North Africa, Churchill pays tribute to his enemy. His exact words: "We have a very daring and skillful opponent against us, and may I say across the havoc of war, a great general." The chamber erupts. Some MPs are outraged, praising a Nazi general while British boys are dying. Churchill doubles down. He insists that recognizing your enemy's skill is not weakness, but reality. The man taking British lives and territory is formidable. Denying that helps no one. In fact, Churchill later adds that Rommel deserves respect because, although a loyal German soldier, he came to hate Hitler and all his works, and eventually took part in the conspiracy against the regime. Churchill's tribute to Rommel becomes one of the most controversial moments of his wartime speeches. Now imagine receiving that news if you're Erwin Rommel. You're fighting a desperate campaign with supply lines stretched across the Mediterranean. Hitler refuses to understand the logistics. Mussolini's Italian forces are unreliable. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and yet you've pushed the British to the brink. And then you hear that the British Prime Minister, the man whose nation you're trying to defeat, has called you a great general in front of Parliament. How do you process that? Rommel's letters home to Lucie, collected after the war in the Rommel papers, reveal a man caught between duty and disillusionment. He writes to her every day, without fail, sometimes multiple times a day. These letters become a diary of his mental state. In 1942, after his meeting with Hitler to plead for more supplies, Rommel writes, "I began to realize that Adolf Hitler simply did not want to see the situation as it was, and he reacted emotionally against what his intelligence must have told him was right. This is not the language of a fanatical Nazi. This is the language of a professional soldier watching a dictator make catastrophic decisions while men die for those mistakes." What's more, Rommel keeps his distance from Nazi ideology in ways almost unheard of for a German field marshal. No Waffen-SS units serve under him in North Africa. Hitler orders that Germans serving in the French Foreign Legion should be shot as traitors if captured. Rommel ignores the order. Hitler issues his Kommandobefehl, the infamous commando order demanding that British SAS commandos be executed on sight. Rommel ignores that too. There's even a story, difficult to verify but widely repeated, that Rommel once stopped his command vehicle at a large tented British field hospital in the desert, walked through it talking to British doctors, and then drove off without interfering. This is the man Churchill was describing, and Rommel knew it. He knew Churchill saw him not as a Nazi fanatic, but as a soldier. A dangerous, skilled, daring opponent, yes, but a soldier nonetheless. Fast forward to October 1944. D-Day has come and gone. Rommel had been in Germany for his wife's birthday when the Allies landed, a disastrous mistake. He wanted to smash the invasion on the beaches, but his superior von Rundstedt kept the panzers back. The invasion succeeds. Rommel is injured when his staff car is strafed by Allied aircraft on July 17th. His skull is fractured. He's sent home to Herrlingen to recover, and here's where the story takes its darkest turn. On July 20th, 1944, a bomb explodes in Hitler's Wolf's Lair headquarters. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg has placed a briefcase bomb under the conference table, then fled. Hitler survives. The reprisals are immediate and horrific. Conspirators are hung on meat hooks in Plötzensee prison with piano wire around their necks. Hitler has their death agonies filmed for his later satisfaction. And in the investigations that follow, Rommel's name surfaces. The extent of Rommel's involvement in the plot remains debated. He knew about the conspiracy, he didn't report it. The conspirators had plans for him to lead Germany after Hitler's fall, but Rommel opposed assassination. He wanted Hitler arrested and tried. He told his family after July 20th that Stauffenberg had bungled it and a frontline soldier would have finished Hitler off. It's not clear how he thought you could overthrow a totalitarian regime without violence, but Rommel believed in the impossible, a Germany freed from Nazi leadership without civil war. Someone betrays him. To this day, we don't know who, but in the interrogations and torture sessions that follow the failed plot, Rommel's name comes up, and Hitler makes a decision. Rommel is too popular to publicly execute. The propaganda value of the Desert Fox is too great, so Hitler offers him a deal delivered by two generals. It's mid-August 1944, and Rommel is home in Herrlingen, recovering from his skull fracture. He tells his 15-year-old son Manfred in a conversation that Manfred will never forget, "My nerves are pretty good, but sometimes I was near collapse. It was casualty reports, casualty reports, casualty reports, wherever you went. I have never fought with such losses, and the worst of it is that it was all without sense or purpose. The sooner it finishes, the better for all of us." Rommel sees the end coming. Germany cannot win. And in these conversations at home, Manfred and Hermann Aldinger, Rommel's old friend from World War I, who's now his aide, begin to hear something remarkable. Rommel talks about the British. He talks about their soldiers, their tenacity, their leadership. And he talks about Churchill. We don't have verbatim transcripts of every conversation. Lucie Rommel kept her husband's letters out of Nazi hands, hiding them carefully so they could be published after the war. But Manfred and Oldinger both testified after the war about these final weeks. And what emerges is a picture of Rommel wrestling with profound questions. He'd fought the British for 3 years. He'd respected their Eighth Army even as he'd beaten them repeatedly. And now, as his own regime prepares to murder him, he reflects on the difference between fighting an honorable enemy and serving a dishonorable cause. Here's what we know for certain. Rommel told his family that Churchill's tribute in Parliament, calling him a great general across the havoc of war, had struck him deeply. In a war defined by propaganda, where both sides demonized the enemy, Churchill had done something different. He'd acknowledged reality. Rommel appreciated that. More than appreciated, it reinforced something Rommel wanted to believe. That there was still such a thing as honor between professional soldiers, even enemies, even in total war. October 13th, 1944. Rommel's last full day of freedom. He receives a call that 2 generals from Berlin will arrive tomorrow at noon. He knows what this means. Many of his associates have been executed or arrested already. He tells his family that evening that he hopes to be sent to the Eastern Front, a desperate hope that he might be given one last chance to serve. But he's also realistic. He changes into his Afrika Korps tunic, the uniform of his greatest victories, the symbol of the war he fought before everything fell apart. That evening, Lucie and Erwin sit together. What do you say to your wife on what might be your last night together? What do you say when you know your own government is coming to kill you? Manfred later recalled fragments of these conversations. Rommel talked about the desert. He talked about the war that seemed so clear in 1941 and 42, Germany against Britain, soldier against soldier, a clean fight in empty sands where cities and civilians were far away. He talked about how different the war had become, the Eastern Front atrocities, the truth about the concentration camps that even field marshals could no longer pretend not to know, the realization that he'd been fighting for a regime that represented everything he'd thought he opposed. And he talked about Churchill. He told Lucie that the British Prime Minister had understood something important. Churchill knew the difference between an enemy and an evil. Rommel was an enemy, Hitler was evil. Churchill had fought Rommel without hating him personally. Rommel saw that now. In the final analysis, with the Gestapo closing in, Rommel understood that Churchill's war was against the Nazi regime, and Rommel's war should have been too. This is speculation based on testimony, yes, but it's educated speculation. We know Rommel admired professional military skill. We know he kept Churchill's speech about him in mind. His family mentioned it. We know he'd become anti-Nazi by 1944. And we know that in his last conversations, he expressed regret not about fighting the British, but about fighting for Hitler. October 14th, 1944, 7 a.m. Rommel and Manfred eat breakfast together. They take a walk in the garden. Rommel tells his son that 2 generals are arriving at noon. Then he goes inside and waits. He's already said goodbye to Lucie in the only way possible. By living these last hours as normally as he can. By not frightening her with what he suspects is coming. By giving her the gift of denial for a few more hours. At noon precisely, a car arrives. Generals Wilhelm Burgdorf and Ernst Maisel, Hitler's henchmen, they ask to speak with Rommel alone. 15 minutes later, Rommel emerges. His face is set. He tells Manfred and Oldinger the truth. Hitler is charging him with high treason. He has 2 choices. Face a People's Court trial, which will be a show trial ending in a grim public execution with his family also arrested and destroyed, or take poison now and receive a state funeral with his family's safety guaranteed. To die at the hands of one's own people is hard, Rommel tells his 15-year-old son. But the house is surrounded, and Hitler is charging me with high treason. Manfred, desperate, asks, "Can't we defend ourselves?" "There's no point," Rommel answers. "It's better for one to die than for all of us to be killed in a shooting affray." He has 15 minutes to say goodbye. He puts on his overcoat. He shakes hands with Manfred. He shakes hands with Hermann Oldinger, his friend from the trenches of World War I. He stops his pet dachshund from trying to follow him. Then he walks to the car. Bergdorf and Maisel sit on either side of him in the back seat to prevent escape. They drive up a steep hill into a dense forest, far from the village, far from witnesses. Gestapo agents are positioned throughout the woods with orders to shoot if Rommel resists. What happens next is reconstructed from unreliable sources, the SS driver and the generals who murdered him. They claim Rommel took the cyanide capsule in the car. The driver claims he stepped away for 10 minutes and returned to find Rommel dead. This is likely a lie. Cyanide of that type kills in about 3 minutes. What we know for certain is that by the time they rush Rommel to a hospital, he's already dead. His service cap and field marshal's baton, which the Nazis claim fell from him in the car, actually become trophies displayed on a desk at Hitler's headquarters. Hermann Oldinger will eventually recover them and return them to Lucie. The Nazis stage Rommel's funeral as a propaganda event. They claim he died of wounds from the earlier strafing attack. Hitler sends a wreath. They hold a memorial service. And German citizens who have no idea what really happened mourn the Desert Fox as a hero fallen in service to the Reich. But here's the extraordinary postscript. When the truth emerges after the war, when the world learns that Rommel was murdered by his own regime for opposing Hitler, the British reaction is telling. Churchill includes Rommel in his post-war writings, noting that although a loyal German soldier initially, Rommel came to hate Hitler and took part in the conspiracy to overthrow the regime. Churchill frames Rommel not as a Nazi who got what he deserved, but as a soldier who finally chose the right side and paid the ultimate price. Veterans from the British 8th Army make pilgrimages to Herrlingen. They leave tributes at Rommel's grave. They visit the site where he died, marked by a large boulder with an inscription in his memory. American veterans do the same. The men who fought against Rommel honor him in death because they understand something essential. Rommel was their enemy, but he fought with honor. He treated prisoners according to the Geneva Conventions. He disobeyed orders to commit war crimes, and in the end, he chose death rather than continue serving evil. So what did Rommel tell his wife about Churchill on that final night? We can't reproduce a word-for-word transcript, but from the fragments preserved by Manfred and Oldinger, from Rommel's letters, from the documented facts of his disillusionment and his final choice, we can reconstruct the substance. Rommel told Lucie that Churchill had been right to fight him, because the cause Rommel had been serving was wrong. Churchill saw the difference between a German soldier and a Nazi fanatic. Rommel, in the end, saw it too. And in those last hours, knowing the Gestapo was closing in, Rommel understood that Churchill's war was the just one, and his own had been tragically misplaced. Churchill once said of Rommel, "May I say across the havoc of war, a great general." It was a remarkable tribute from one enemy to another, but perhaps even more remarkable is this. Rommel accepted that tribute, not with the pride of a Nazi warrior, but with the bitter understanding of a soldier who realized too late that he'd fought on the wrong side. October 14th, 1944. A 15-year-old boy watches his father walk to a car that will become his hearse. The father leaves behind letters to his wife, documents hidden from the Nazis, testaments to 3 years fighting an enemy he respected more than the regime he served. And in those letters, in those final conversations, Erwin Rommel and Winston Churchill achieved something almost unprecedented in total war: mutual respect that survived hatred, propaganda, and death itself. Rommel died forced to swallow poison by a regime he'd come to despise. Churchill lived to write the history, but in that history, Churchill gave Rommel something precious: the acknowledgement that a man can be on the wrong side and still fight with honor, and that recognizing your enemy's skill and eventual moral awakening doesn't weaken your victory. It enriches it. The Desert Fox and the British Bulldog, two men who never met face to face, two men separated by nations, ideologies, and the unforgiving arithmetic of war, but in the end, connected by something older than nationalism. The recognition that even in the worst war humanity ever fought, honor between warriors was still possible. And sometimes, that honor mattered more than victory itself. What do you think? Did Rommel wait too long to oppose Hitler? Could he have done more? Should Churchill have praised him at all, given that Rommel fought for a genocidal regime? And are there other enemy commanders from history who earned respect from both sides? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear about another forgotten friendship that shaped World War II, let me know. There are more stories like this hiding in the margins of history. Stories that remind us that even in total war, humanity sometimes finds a way through.